Chapter 1. The restaurant had been open for 3 years, and it was mine in every way a thing could be yours. I had cooked in other people's kitchens for 9 years before I opened it. I had worked under 3 chefs who had taught me different things. The first had taught me technique. The second had taught me discipline. The third had taught me that discipline without instinct was just repetition. I had taken all 3 of those things and combined them with the specific knowledge of what I wanted to eat when I was tired and needed something true, and that was what I cooked. The restaurant was small, 32 covers, a room that had once been a printing workshop in Bermondsey, and that still had the original pressed tin ceiling and the windows that were slightly too large for the space and let in more light than they should. I had not changed any of it. I had put tables in and a kitchen and a bar and a menu that changed every week because I found the same menu boring, and I assumed the people eating it did too. We were full most nights by the second year, not because a famous reviewer had come and written something, because people had come and told other people, and those people had come back, the specific organic growth of a place that was doing something real. I was in the kitchen most evenings. My sous chef was better at the front of house relationships than I was, and I was better at the kitchen than she was, and we had divided the work accordingly. But I always came out at the end of the service. I walked the room. I talked to the tables. I liked knowing who had been in. I noticed the regular on his 4th visit. Not his first. The first time a new face came in, I registered them and moved on. The second time I noticed the face was familiar. The third time I started paying attention. The 4th time, a Thursday in March, I stopped at the pass and looked through the service window at table 7 and understood that the man sitting alone at the corner table with the brown hair and the blue eyes and the notebook he had just put away when the food arrived had been here before. Recently. Repeatedly. He was not eating the way most people ate. He was attending to it, not performing attention the way some people performed it when they wanted to be seen appreciating something, actually attending. He took the first bite and was still for a moment, not in a performed way, in the way of someone who was tasting something and giving the tasting its full due. He had a small notebook. He put it away when the food arrived and picked it up again when he had finished. He wrote something, not much, a few lines. I told my sous chef about him. She looked through the service window. She said he had been in twice before that she remembered, both times alone, both times the corner table, both times the notebook. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. Chapter 2. I found the reviews by accident in the 8th week. My front-of-house manager had been tracking our online mentions and showed me a spreadsheet one Monday morning. Most of it was the usual. Social media posts, a few blog mentions, the standard digital footprint of a restaurant that people liked enough to photograph their food. And then a column for a publication I had not seen before, a food writing newsletter, niche, a few thousand subscribers, apparently well regarded in certain circles. The column was called Table for One. It published every Friday. It reviewed a single restaurant each week, always from a solo diner's perspective, always unsigned. The author used no name, no byline, just the column title and the date. We had been reviewed 6 times. I sat at my kitchen table on that Monday morning and read all 6 of them back to back. They were extraordinary. Not in the way of flattering reviews that made you feel seen in a general way, in the way of being seen specifically. The first review was about the lamb dish I had put on in January. He had written about the temperature of it, not the flavor first, the temperature. The way it arrived at the table at exactly the right heat to allow the fat to be what it was supposed to be without tipping into greasiness. The way this was not an accident, but a decision that had to be made and remade every service, because the walk from the kitchen to the corner table was long enough that you could lose 2 degrees if you were not careful. I had been making that decision every service for 3 years. Nobody had ever written about it. The second review was about the bread, not the bread itself, the moment before the bread. The way it arrived without being asked for and without fanfare, just placed on the table as if it had always been going to be there, and the way this created a specific quality of welcome that was different from restaurants where bread was a transaction. I put my coffee down. He understood what I was trying to do, not just the surface of it, the underneath of it, the reasons behind each decision. The 4th review had a line that I read 3 times. It said, "This is a kitchen that is in conversation with its diners, not performing for them, talking to them. There is a difference and most restaurants have never found it." I sat with that for a long time. Then I texted my sous chef. I told her about the newsletter. She read it and texted back, "Whoever this is, they get it." I looked at the Thursday reservation list, 2 weeks ago, last week. Table 7, corner, single cover, name, C. Reed. C. Reed had been coming every Thursday for 8 weeks. The following Thursday, I paid attention in a new way. Chapter 3. I watched him for 3 Thursdays before I spoke to him. Not obviously. I had a kitchen to run and a service to manage, and I was not going to neglect either of those things to stare at a diner through the service window. But I watched when I could, and what I saw built a picture. He arrived at 7:15 every time, not 7, not 7:30, 7:15. He had a specific relationship with punctuality that was not about being early and not about being on time. It was about being there when he wanted to be there. He always ordered the same way. He read the menu completely. He did not rush this. The menu changed every week, so there was always something new to read, but he read the whole thing regardless, including the things he had before if they were back. Then he ordered. He asked questions about 2 or 3 dishes. Good questions. The kind that told you he had understood what he had read and wanted the one piece of information that was not on the menu. He ate slowly, not in the performed way of someone making a show of savoring, in the way of someone who was working. He paid attention to each dish in a way that was focused, and then he wrote in the notebook, not during the meal, after, when the plate was cleared and before the next course arrived. He had blue eyes that were paying full attention to everything in the room, not intrusively, not like someone cataloging, like someone who found the room genuinely interesting and was letting it be interesting without demanding anything from it. He always left a good tip. My front-of-house manager had noticed this independently and mentioned it, not a calculated percentage, the specific amount of someone who understood what the work was. On the 3rd Thursday of watching, I came out of the kitchen at the end of service earlier than usual. Most tables had finished. He was still at table 7 with the last of his wine and the notebook open. He looked up when I came into the room. Our eyes met across the restaurant. He closed the notebook. I walked over. Chapter 4. I did not introduce myself as the chef. He knew which restaurant he was in. He could see the kitchen from the corner table, and I had come out of it. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, not asked, just sat. He watched me do this with an expression that was somewhere between surprised and not surprised. I told him he had been here 11 times. He did not deny it. He picked up his wine glass. I told him I had read the newsletter. Something moved across his face, not alarm, something more complicated, the expression of someone who had been keeping something and had just found out the keeping was over. I told him the piece about the bread was the most accurate thing anyone had written about this restaurant. He looked at me. I told him that the bread decision was mine specifically, that I had argued with my front-of-house manager about it for 6 months before we opened because she thought it was presumptuous, and I thought it was the opposite of presumptuous, and that I had never been able to explain to anyone why I thought that until I read what he wrote about the quality of welcome it created. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the bread was the first thing he had noticed. He said it before he had even tasted anything. He said he had walked in and the bread was on the table, and he had understood immediately that whoever had made that decision had thought carefully about what it meant to receive someone into a space. I looked at him across the table. Tan skin and brown hair and blue eyes that were paying the same quality of attention to me that they paid to everything in the room, focused and interested and not demanding anything. I asked how long he had been writing the column. 4 years, he told me, always solo, always unsigned. He had started it because he ate alone frequently for work and had found that most restaurant criticism was written from the perspective of a social experience, and that solo dining was a different experience that nobody was writing about honestly. I asked what his work was. He was a journalist, not food specifically, long-form features. The restaurant column was a side project, a private one until now. I asked why he kept coming back. He looked at his wine glass for a moment, then he looked at me. He said the food changed every week, but something underneath it did not change. He said most restaurants that changed their menus frequently were inconsistent because the changing was the point rather than the cooking. He said here the changing was in service of the cooking. The menu changed because the cooking demanded it. He said he kept coming back to understand that better. I sat with that. Then I asked what he had understood so far. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the approaching version. He said he would have to keep coming back to find out. Chapter 5. He came back the following Thursday. This should not have surprised me. He had been coming every Thursday for 11 weeks. The conversation at the end of service had not changed that, but it felt different now. He was not anonymous anymore. He was C. Reed, who was actually Cadden, who was a journalist who had been writing about my restaurant for 11 weeks, and who had said the bread decision was the first thing he had noticed. I did not go to his table during service. That would have been wrong. He was a diner and I had a kitchen, and the two things should not become confused. But at the end of service, when the room had mostly cleared, I came out again. He was still there. I sat down across from him. This time he had left the wine and had coffee instead. He pushed the second cup across the table when I sat down. He had ordered two. I looked at the cup. He said he had noticed I always had coffee at the end of service. I had always had coffee at the end of service. It was a ritual, the decompression of a long kitchen evening in a single cup. He had been watching as carefully as I had. We talked for an hour, not about the restaurant specifically, about food in the larger sense, what it was for, what it communicated that other things could not. He had opinions that were specific and that he held without defensiveness. When I disagreed with something, he did not capitulate. He thought about it and either revised or explained why he was not revising. I found this remarkable. Most people I argued about food with either immediately agreed with me or immediately dug in. He did neither. He actually considered. He asked about the menu change process, how it worked, where the ideas came from, how I decided what stayed and what went. I told him more than I usually told people, the way a dish started as an instinct and became a recipe through failure, the 3 versions of the current lamb preparation before I found the one that was right. The dish I had taken off 3 weeks ago because it had stopped being honest, and I had not understood why until I had eaten it one evening and realized I was bored by it. He wrote nothing down, no notebook, he just listened. Afterward, I stood on the pavement outside the restaurant in the late-night air and thought about the conversation and what it had been. It had been the best conversation about food I had had in years. With someone who was not a chef. Chapter 6. The Thursday end-of-service conversations became a thing. Not every Thursday. He traveled sometimes for work and was not always in London. But most Thursdays, after the kitchen was closed and the room was clearing, he would still be at table 7 and I would come out and sit across from him and the coffee would be there. My sous chef noticed. Of course she noticed. She was in the kitchen with me and she could see through the service window and she was not someone who missed things. She said nothing for 3 weeks. Then she came to me on a Monday morning with the Missy N place list and said, while looking at the list rather than at me, that the man at table 7 had been coming for 16 weeks and that the end-of-service conversations appeared to be lasting longer each time. I told her he was the newsletter reviewer. She looked up from the list. I told her about the column. She read it on her phone while I talked. When I finished, she looked up again. She said he understood the bread thing. I said yes. She went back to the Missy N place list. She said nothing else about it. But the following Thursday, she made sure the table 7 coffee order was handled by her personally and that there were always 2 cups. What the conversations were like is difficult to describe in a way that captures it properly. They ranged. That was the first quality. They started with the meal and then went somewhere else and then somewhere else again. He asked questions that assumed I had thought about things which I had. I asked questions that assumed he had thought about things which he had. Neither of us performed having thought about things. He was interesting in the specific way of someone who had been paying attention to the world for a long time and had accumulated a perspective that was genuinely their own, not the borrowed perspective of someone who had read the right books, the built perspective of someone who had had enough experiences and had made enough of them to have an actual point of view. I told him about the kitchen years, the 3 chefs and what each had taught me. He listened to all of it and at the end asked which of the 3 things I found hardest to maintain simultaneously. I had not thought about it in those terms before. I thought about it then. I told him discipline was the easiest to maintain, and instinct was the most expensive because it required being in a specific state of mind that the logistics of running a restaurant frequently made difficult. He wrote nothing down. He never wrote anything down when I talked to him. I asked about the journalism. He had been doing it for 12 years. He had covered things I had read without knowing he had written them. When he told me which pieces had been his, I went home and read them. They were very good, specific and honest in the way his reviews were specific and honest. He noticed the world the way I noticed food, fully and with the understanding that the surface was not the point. By the 20th Thursday, I was aware of what was happening and was being careful about it. Being careful was the right response. He was a reviewer and I was a chef, and that was a complicated combination. The reviews were good. They had brought people in. If the dynamic between us changed and the reviews changed, I would not know if the reviews had changed because the food had changed or because something else had changed. I did not want that uncertainty in my kitchen. I was being careful, and careful was right, and I was also aware that careful had limits. Chapter 7. The 23rd review was different from the others. Not in quality, in what it said. The others had been about the food and the space and the decisions behind both. The 23rd was about something underneath all of that. It published on a Friday morning. I read it with my coffee before the kitchen prep started. He had written about the end of service, not specifically, without naming it. He wrote about what it was like to eat alone in a restaurant and then have the person who had made the food come and sit across from you. He wrote about what that changed, how the meal became something that had a before and an after, how the food tasted different in retrospect when you understood more about the person who had made it. He wrote, there are restaurants you go to for the food and restaurants you go to because the food is a conversation and you want to be in the conversation. This is the second kind. I have been in the conversation for 22 weeks. I am aware that this has complicated my objectivity. I am also aware that the complication is the most honest thing I can report. I read that paragraph 4 times. I put my phone down. I made another coffee. I stood in my kitchen on a Friday morning before the prep started and thought about what I had just read. He had written about it, about us, without naming it, with the specific honesty of someone who had decided that the complicated thing was the true thing, and the true thing was what he wrote. I picked my phone back up. I opened the newsletter. I found the contact email at the bottom. It was a generic address, newsletter management, not his personal one. I wrote, I read the 23rd review. I think you should come in on a night that is not Thursday. I think we should have dinner, not the end of service version, the actual version, Mara. I sent it before I could think too carefully about it. Then I started the prep. He replied at 11:47. He wrote, Saturday, what time? I wrote 7:15. He wrote, I will be there. I showed my sous chef the exchange. She read it. She handed my phone back. She said, finally. I told her it was not finally. I told her it was the beginning of something that required careful handling. She went back to the prep without saying anything else. She was smiling at the vegetables. Chapter 8. He arrived at 7:15. Of course he did. I was not in the kitchen. I was in the restaurant. My sous chef had the kitchen tonight, and she had made it clear that she did not need me, and that the kitchen would be fine, and that I should go and have dinner like a person. I had booked table 7, his table. He came in and looked at the room and found me, and something in his face did the thing it did when something pleased him, not the performed version, the actual one. We sat down across from each other. Not at the end of service with coffee and a half-empty room. At the beginning of a Saturday evening with a full restaurant around us and a menu in front of him that had changed since Thursday and that he read carefully, the whole thing, the way he always did. He asked 3 questions about the menu. Good ones. I answered them. He ordered. I had already decided what I was having. We talked. What was different about this from the Thursday conversations was difficult to name precisely. Something about the formality of it. The menu and the ordering and the full room. Something about being on the same side of the table rather than on opposite sides of the kitchen-diner divide. He told me about a piece he was working on, long form, 6 months of reporting. He described what he had found and where it was going and what the difficulty was. The difficulty was a structural one. He had too much material and the shape of it was not yet clear, and he had learned that when the shape was not clear, the answer was not to cut material, but to find the thing the material was actually about, which was always different from the thing he had thought it was about when he started. I told him that was exactly the process of developing a dish. You started with too much, and the work was not subtraction, but finding the actual thing. He looked at me. He said he had thought about that parallel before. He said he had thought it might be the reason the food here felt like writing. I asked what he meant. He said good writing has a shape that feels inevitable, like it could not have been any other way. The food here is like that. Each dish feels like the only possible version of itself. I looked at him across the table. blue eyes, and the full quality of his attention and the specific thing he had just said. I told him that was the thing I was always trying to make, the inevitable version. He had written around it in the reviews, but he had not said it exactly like that before. He said he had not found the right words for it before. The food arrived. My sous chef had sent something out that was not on the menu, a small extra course. I looked at the plate and recognized it. It was a dish I had taken off 2 months ago because it had stopped being honest. She had made it honest again. She had found the thing it was actually about. I looked toward the kitchen. The service window was dark. She was not watching. She absolutely was watching. We stayed until the restaurant closed. We were the last table. When the last of the other diners left, my sous chef came out of the kitchen and said the kitchen was cleaned and she was leaving, and she did not look at either of us as she left, which was her version of giving us privacy. The restaurant was empty and quiet, and the lights were low, and we were still at table 7 with the last of the wine. He said the 23rd review was the most honest thing he had written in 4 years of the column. I told him I knew. I told him it was the reason I had written to the newsletter address. He said I was not certain you would read it that way. I told him I read everything carefully. He almost smiled, then he did smile, the full version. Chapter 9. He walked me to the tube after the restaurant closed. It was late and the city was quiet in the specific way of a Saturday after midnight. We walked at the same pace without discussing it. At the tube entrance, he stopped. He said he would like to see me again, not on a Thursday, not a review, something else. I told him Thursdays were still Thursdays. The reviews were the reviews. Those things did not need to change. He looked at me. I told him the food is what the food is. The reviews are what they are. Those things are separate from this. He said, "You have thought about this." I had thought about it for 6 weeks, since the 23rd review and what it had said about complicated objectivity. I had thought about it carefully, and what I had arrived at was that the complication was real and manageable. He reviewed what he ate. He ate honestly. The food was the food. None of those things changed because of this. He said, "All right, then yes, something else." Something else was Sunday morning coffee near his flat in Islington. It was a Wednesday evening walk through Bermondsey because he wanted to see the neighborhood the restaurant was in when it was not a restaurant night. It was a long phone call on a Tuesday when I was doing admin and he was finishing the piece, and neither of us had said we were going to call, but both of us had picked up the phone. He came on Thursdays. He came on the other days too. My sous chef was insufferably pleased about this. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She was pleased at the vegetables every morning, and that was enough. He was easy to be with in the specific way of someone who did not require performance. I had spent 9 years in professional kitchens where performance was constant. The performance of confidence when you were uncertain. The performance of calm when the service was falling apart. The performance of certainty about a dish you were not certain about. He was somewhere I did not perform. He asked about the dish my sous chef had sent out on Saturday, the one I had taken off the menu 2 months ago. I told him the story, why I had taken it off, what my sous chef had found in it, how it was different from what it had been before. He said what was wrong with it before. I said it was about the technique. It was showing off what it could do rather than being what it was. He said that is exactly what happened to the piece I finished last week. I looked at him. He said first draft was about what I could find. Final draft is about what I found. The showing off version was better written. The honest version is better. I thought about that for a long time. He noticed things the same way I noticed food. The surface was not the point. The underneath was the point. And he had patience with the underneath that most people did not have because he understood that it required time and the time was the work. Chapter 10. He said it on a Sunday morning in his flat in Islington. We had been having coffee. He made good coffee, not elaborate, just good the way his cooking was not elaborate and just good. He was reading something on his laptop, and I was reading the Sunday paper, and his flat was doing its Sunday morning thing, which was warm and quiet and full of books and a particular quality of light that came through the east-facing windows at that hour. He closed his laptop. He looked at me across the coffee table. He said he had been thinking about what the column was about, not the specific reviews, the larger thing, why he had been writing it for 4 years, what he had been looking for. I put the paper down. He said, I think I have been writing about what it feels like to be in the presence of something honest, food that is honest, spaces that are honest, the specific quality of being somewhere that is exactly what it says it is and nothing more and nothing less. He looked at me. He said, and I think that is why I kept coming back. Because the restaurant is honest, and because you are honest, and because being in the presence of both of those things for 20-something Thursday evenings was the most honest I had felt in a long time. The flat was very quiet. He said, I am in love with you. I wanted to say it directly because that is also the honest version. I looked at him, brown hair and blue eyes, and the full quality of his attention, and the specific thing he had just said in exactly the right words. I had been in love with him since the review about the bread, since the line about being in a conversation rather than a performance, since a man with a small notebook at table 7 had understood something about what I was trying to do that nobody else had understood and had written it down and put it in a newsletter that 8 people had read before I found it. I told him so. He said the bread review was the 3rd week. I said yes. He said that was a long time to not say anything. I told him I had a kitchen to run, and you were a reviewer, I was being careful. He said, were you right to be careful? I thought about it honestly. I said, yes, the careful period produced the 23rd review, and the 23rd review produced Saturday, and Saturday produced this, so yes. He looked at me for a moment. Then he reached across the coffee table and took my hand. The Sunday morning was being a Sunday morning. The light through the east windows was exactly right. The coffee was good. The books were on the shelves. That was everything. Epilogue. 1 year after the first review, the restaurant has 38 covers. I added 6 when I took over the space next door and knocked through. I had been resistant to expanding for 2 years because expanding usually meant diluting, and I did not want to dilute anything. My sous chef had argued for it for 6 months. She had been right. The 6 extra covers had not changed what the restaurant was. They had made it more of what it already was. He still comes on Thursdays. The column is still unsigned, still table for 1. He still sits at table 7, which is now a table for 2 because I had the furniture changed. He still orders everything on the menu in his head before he decides. He still writes in the notebook after the meal and not during it. The reviews are still the reviews, honest and specific and about the underneath rather than the surface. They have not changed because of us, and I have not changed the food because of him, and both of those things are true, and both are right. I come out at the end of service. I always come out at the end of service. I walk the room and talk to the tables. The last table is always table 7. He has coffee waiting. Tonight the menu had a new dish, a dish I had been developing for 6 weeks, and that had gone through 4 versions before I found the one that was honest. He had eaten it and written in the notebook, and when I sat down, he slid the notebook across the table. I looked at it. He never showed me the notebook. In a year of Thursdays and everything else, he had never shown me what was in it. I looked at him. He said, read the last entry. I opened the notebook to the last page. The entry was 3 lines. He had written about the new dish, the way it tasted like a decision that had been made and remade until it was inevitable, the way it tasted like the only possible version of itself. Then below the 3 lines, he had written one more sentence. It said, I am going to keep coming back. I looked at him across table 7. He was looking at me with the blue eyes and the full quality of his attention that had been paying attention to this restaurant, and this food and me for a year of Thursdays and everything in between. I closed the notebook. I pushed it back across the table. I said, I know. He picked up his coffee. The restaurant was quiet and warm and mine, in every way a thing could be yours. And he was at table 7. That was everything. That was more than enough.